Chapter 1: Meeting by a Grave. Though I lived most of my early years here in Kent, its marshes can still frighten me. The mists make figures and strange sounds carry over the river close by. It was no different that one Christmas Eve, when I was 7 years old. I was visiting my parents' graves at the churchyard on the marshes. I never really knew my parents, so I could only read their names on their tombstones: Philip and Georgiana Purra. Philip is my name too, but when I was learning to talk, I could not pronounce it, so I made it into Pip, the name I came to be called all my life. As I tried desperately to remember my parents, I began to cry. Suddenly, a terrible voice cried, "Stop your noises or I'll cut your throat." A huge man appeared from among the graves and seized my chin in a steely grip. He was dressed in coarse gray clothes, with an iron band clamped around one leg. He was wet and shivering and mud-stained, but his eyes glared brightly at me. I was terror-stricken. "Please, sir, don't kill me," I pleaded. "Please don't." "What's your name? Quick," he demanded. "And where do you live, you and your folks?" "Pip is my name, sir," I managed to say. "My parents are there in those graves, and I live with my only sister, Mrs. Joe Gargery, and her husband, the blacksmith in the village." "Blacksmith, eh?" he asked, looking down at his leg. Suddenly, in one motion, he turned me upside down and emptied my pockets. A few nails and a piece of bread were all I had in. Putting me right side up on top of the high tombstone, he crammed the bread in his mouth and ate it ravenously. "Now, young villain, I'm deciding if I'll let you live," he said, tilting me backwards. "Do you know what a file is?" I nodded, too frightened to speak, as I clung to the tombstone. "Well, you get me one, a file, and some food. You bring them here tomorrow morning, you understand me?" Swallowing hard and clinging to him as he tilted me even more, I gasped, "Yes, sir." "But you tell anyone and you're a dead boy. I got a friend here who loves cutting the heart out of a boy. That boy may think he's safe in bed, but my friend knows how to sneak into a warm bedroom and find that boy. Remember what I say. Now go." I nodded eagerly, then jumped down and ran as fast as I could back home, my heart beating so loudly that I could hear it. But at home there was more trouble. As I tiptoed into the kitchen, my brother-in-law Joe, the blacksmith, shook his big blonde head at me. "Pip, where have you been?" he asked. "She's been out looking for you." At that moment the door burst open and my sister stormed in. Mrs. Joe is 20 years older than me and has a hot temper. Without a word, she banged me on the head and threw me at Joe. But Joe stepped in front of me and turned to face my sister as she rushed at me again. She tried to dodge behind Joe, but he's a giant man. Gentle, but giant. And Joe and I turned like the front and back ends of a horse until my sister got tired of chasing me. Joe smiled at me as soon as the danger was past and drew me to a warm fireplace. Above the sound of my sister slamming pots and dishes, I heard a gun in the distance. "What was that, Joe?" I whispered. "It's a warning gun from the prison ships down the river. A convict escaped." That's the second one. The gun fired last night, too, to warn us that a robber or murderer was loose." A shiver went through me at Joe's words. My sister banged on the table to indicate her impatience, and we hurried to sit down to dinner. She buttered bread for me and Joe and handed it out. Though Joe was the provider of the bread and butter, he was too good-natured to object to being treated like a child. While my sister complained, of all the house cleaning she had been doing in preparation for a party the next day, Christmas Day. I hid my bread in my pocket. In case I couldn't find anything to take from my sister's pantry, I had to be sure to have something to give to my waiting convict. Since my sister never allowed me a candle to light my way to my attic room, I stumbled in the darkness that night, fearing that I too would end up on a prison ship because of the thieving I was planning from my sister's pantry. Once in bed, I imagined a young convict at the foot of my bed, ready to cut out my heart. So I kept the bread clutched in my hand all night, ready to show it to him. He did not come, but I kept expecting him, so I barely slept. At the first gray light of dawn, I stole downstairs. The creaking steps seemed to call, "Stop, thief!" after me. Because of the holiday season, there was much more food in the pantry than I expected. I took some bread, a hunk of cheese, a pork pie, and some brandy. This last I poured into my empty bottle and refilled the brandy bottle with water to make up for what I had taken. I dared take the pork pie only because it was on the back shelf, so I guessed my sister did not intend to serve it soon. A door led from the kitchen to Joe's blacksmith forge. I slipped in and selected a heavy file from among Joe's tools. With all of these things clutched under my jacket, I ran to the marshes through the heavy morning mist.